Last week we launched a brand new series called David, an unfinished story, and this series is part of the unfinished journey that we're on as a church. And there are booklets around the room, at the tables around the room, that describes a little bit more in detail what this unfinished journey is all about. But it's a 2-year discipleship and generosity journey that we launched last year to finish what was started on this campus when our first group of elders purchased this piece of property 30 years ago, and that was to build a large pool. And so we got a hole out there, and we're going to get some water next week. No, just kidding. About 1,200-seat worship center and a large lobby and new next-gen space under that. And the cool thing is that most of us weren't even here 30 years ago. Some of us weren't even alive 30 years ago. I was 2. Okay, just kidding. 3. I was 3. But the cool thing is that we get to be a part of this legacy that our leaders led the church into 30 years ago, and that will outlive us, that will outlast us as we commit ourselves to this journey of sacrificial giving to finish what was started on this campus, to finish what was started when God launched this church 33 years ago. And as we do that, as we respond to God in obedience, as we accept His invitation to join Him on mission, we put ourselves in a position to allow Him to finish what He started in us. God is writing a story in my life. God is writing a story in your life, and it's part of this grand story that He's writing over humanity, this grand story of redemption. And there's no greater privilege than to be on mission with God. We all have a story, and we talked last week about how we all want a great ending to our story, but the ending to the story is always dictated by the middle of the story and how we handle the middle of the story. And the middle of the story comes with all kinds of emotions. There's happy parts, there's sad parts, there's difficult parts, there's easy parts, there's parts that we want to go back and reread and relive. There are parts that we want to go back and just tear out and completely forget about. And it's how we handle the middle part of our story that defines the end of the story. And we're talking through the life of one of the greatest characters in the Bible, the life of King David. King David had a great ending to his story. We talked about that last week, that Paul says in Acts 13:36 that David served God's purpose in his time, and then he died. And one of the reasons we're able to learn so much from David is because all of the parts of his story, the parts that he would just as soon be left out, are written down for us to read and to learn from. David's story is not all puppy dogs and roses. There are some deeply tragic chapters in his story. The most infamous chapter was his affair with Bathsheba, which we'll talk about in a few weeks. But it's not the only chapter of tragedy. It's not the only chapter of regret. Anybody have any regrets in their story? Raise your hand if you've done something that you regret, that you wish you could go back and redo. Okay, great. Look around you. Look at the perfect people around you, okay? You weren't raising your hand. I mean, learn from them, okay? No, raise your hand if you lied and didn't raise your hand and now you have a regret. See it all? There we go, right back there. Now we got it going. Regret is part of everybody's story. It's what we share in common, right? We talked about this in our Dress the Mess. We're all a mess because we all have some regrets. We've done some things that we wish we could go back and undo, but here's the hard truth, and you know this. You can't undo what's been done. Man, wouldn't life be grand if you could just rewind and redo that? But you can't undo what's been done. That thing that you wish you could go back and undo, it's a permanent part of your story. You can't erase it. That divorce is done. That lie you told is done. The moment of anger and the words that came out of your mouth, done. The thing you stole, done. The test you cheated on, done. The affair you had, done. And so think about your biggest regret for just a minute. And I know that's depressing, and I know you don't want to think about it. You just want to go back and you want to tear that part out of the story, but that's the problem. If we tear it out, we don't learn from it. If you forget it, you'll repeat it. That's just how it works. If we forget it, we'll repeat it. There's something there that needs to be dealt with, and it's likely one of these two things or both, fear or isolation. Fear or isolation. As you think about your biggest regret, I can almost guarantee that it happened because of one of these two things. There was a moment where you were afraid, or there was a moment where you were alone. You ended a relationship because you were afraid. You did something sexually immoral. You had an affair, or you engaged in sex before marriage because you didn't want him to leave. You didn't want her to leave, and you were isolated, and you felt like you were going to be all alone. For most of us, our biggest regrets can be traced back to one of these two things. One of my biggest regrets from my childhood was in 7th grade. I was going through tryouts for the middle school basketball team, and I felt pretty confident that I could make it a ways through, and there were about 40 kids that started out, and then it got cut down to 30, and then to 20, and then to 15, and I'm still standing, but I'm thinking, I don't know, my odds are decreasing here, and I started to feel like I'm not really going to make the team, and so I decided not to try out, because that way I could control the narrative, right? I didn't get cut. I just decided not to play. I was afraid of being cut by the coach because I was afraid of being rejected by my friends. Now, I learned later that I would have made the team had I just shown up to the last day of tryouts, but I couldn't undo what was done. And so I watched a lot of basketball from the bleachers rather than playing a lot of basketball in my 7th grade year. Now, I didn't have enough maturity as a 7th grader to process through why I had made that decision. It wasn't until much later in life when I began to see a pattern in my life emerging of me not trying things or backing out of things for fear of failure or fear of rejection, which is all connected to feelings of inadequacy and perfectionism. And so fear has led to a lot of regrets in my life. And when I was forced to think about it, I was able to learn from it. And then this crazy thing happened. I actually started to grow a little bit, because growth happens when we learn from regrets. You can't undo what's been done, but here's the good news. You don't have to redo what you can't undo. You don't have to redo what you can't undo. So let's dive into David's story. And last week we saw David do what nobody else was willing to do, including King Saul, and that was go head-to-head with Goliath. And so David goes head-to-head with Goliath, and he comes out ahead, specifically with Goliath's head, right? And he was the champion. He won the battle. And even if you've never read the Bible, you probably know the story of David and Goliath. But we learned something last week, and that was it's not a story about David, or it's not a story about Goliath. It's a story about God. That David didn't take on Goliath because he had something to prove. He took on Goliath, in his own words, because he has defied the armies of the living God. He has defied the armies of the living God. So David was only about 15 years old, and he was already on mission with God. And the mission that God is on is that his name would be glorified, his kingdom would be established, and the whole world will be reconciled to himself. That's what God is up to in the world. That's the mission that God has in this world. That's the purpose that he's invited us to participate in. And our life finds meaning and purpose when we prioritize God's purpose above our own. Our stories find fulfillment when we join God in what he's already doing. God is already working. We just got to figure out where that is. And we believe God has got a work going on right here that we're inviting you to participate in. So David understood that at 15 years old. And the other thing he understood at 15 years old was that his victory was dependent upon God. That when we're invited into the mission of God, we're dependent on the God of the mission. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, and you maybe remember the story, and the Egyptians were bearing down on them, and they were afraid. They were scared for their life. And Moses said to them, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Now, when you're afraid, what's the last thing you want to do? You don't want to be still. But that was the advice that Moses gave. That the Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. Trust God to deliver you. Trust God to strengthen you. Trust God to protect you. And David did. He said this: "He has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." David was not afraid of Goliath. He had complete faith in God that he would walk out of the valley in total victory. But what he got at 15, he forgot at 22. And here's why. Because it's easy to trust God when things are going well. It's easy to trust God when you don't really have anything that you really need to trust God for in your life, when things are just going the way that you think they should always go. It's really difficult to trust God when there's conflict in your story. It's easy to trust God when life is all that you want it to be, that your job is going well, your kids are healthy, your finances are in order, your marriage is good, but it's difficult to trust God when there's conflict. It's difficult to trust God when you're alone and when you're afraid, because when you're alone and when you're afraid, the ways of Jesus seem really inadequate and really irrelevant. If that's not true, we wouldn't have regrets. If the ways of Jesus didn't seem inadequate or irrelevant or insignificant when we were afraid or we were alone, we wouldn't have regrets. We would have done things the Jesus way. We would have done things the way that Jesus would have done them. You'll never have regrets when you do things the Jesus way. You just won't. Nobody has ever had regrets over being kind. Nobody's ever had regrets over being generous. Nobody's ever had regrets over being honest. That's not to say it's not easy. The right things are rarely easy, but they're never regretful. But when we're afraid and when we're alone, the ways of Jesus seem inadequate. The ways of Jesus seem irrelevant. The ways of Jesus seem less appealing. We would rather take matters into our own hands. We would rather run and hide than confront the issue. And this is where David finds himself at the age of 22, isolated and afraid. And Goliath has nothing. Goliath has nothing on these two giants. So when David comes out of the valley of Elah, Saul is impressed. He said, hey, you're staying with me. You're going to be part of my army. He knows a good thing when he sees it. David had been his armor bearer, but now Saul is going to give him much deserved promotion. It says, whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. And everything he did, he had great success. And here's why. Because the Lord was with him. Because the Lord was with him. When you're invited into the mission of God, you're dependent on the God of the mission. Or we can say it this way. Whatever God is asking you to do, He will always be with you. That rhymes, right? You can remember that. Whatever God is asking you to do, He will always be with you. God is not going to send you into something without walking into it with you. God is not going to ask you to do something difficult and then withdraw His presence from you and just laugh at you as you fail. God is not going to call you to something without equipping you for the something He's calling you to, right? Whether it's leading a small group like you heard about in the video, or leading a ministry, or going on a mission trip, or giving sacrificially like so many of us are doing right now in this journey. Whatever God is asking you to do, He will always be with you. David was anointed by God. And if you're a Jesus follower, so are you. Like when you gave your life to Christ, when you became a Jesus follower and you were baptized, you received the gift of the Holy Spirit. Peter talks about that in Acts chapter 2, verse 38, that God's Spirit is dwelling within you, which means that you don't go anywhere without God. And which means that you don't do anything without God. So you're never really alone, and there's really never a reason to be afraid. Do you know the commandment that God gives in Scripture more than any other commandment? Do not be afraid. More than any other commandment, this commandment right here, do not be afraid. Do you know the promise that God gives more than any other promise in Scripture? I will be with you. I will be with you. So God speaks directly into our two greatest giants of fear and isolation. Do not be afraid. I will be with you. So David is doing well because God is with him. And God anointed him. And God is for him. And God has called him. So God will not let him fail. And his success was starting to become a real problem for Saul. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. Now, David was successful because the Lord was with him. Saul was afraid, this is important, because the Lord had departed from him. And the reason that God was with David and departed from Saul is because David was on mission for God and Saul was on mission for who? Saul. Listen, God is not going to go with you on mission. I love the phrase, and we say it all the time, and I know we don't really mean it, but it comes out so weird. I invited Jesus into my life. Wait a minute. The creator of the world, you invited him to go with you? Isn't that the other way around? He's invited us. God's not going to go on mission with you. God is not going to bless your mission. That doesn't mean that you won't be successful, but you'll probably be miserable. Do you know any successful people who are miserable? I know a lot of successful people who are miserable. Here's why. Because they're on mission for themselves. And you can be successful in that. But you're missing the only mission that really matters. God's not going to go on mission with you. God wants us to go on mission with him. And so Saul becomes afraid because God says, listen, you want to go on your own mission? Go on your mission. But I got another mission I'm attending to. I'm with David because David's on mission with me. And so Saul's fear is getting ready to lead him into regret. He wants David dead. So he arranges a marriage between David and one of his daughters if David is willing to go fight in his battles. He doesn't want to kill David himself because everybody likes David, so that would look really bad on him. He just says, I won't raise a hand against him. I'll let the Philistines do that. Like if he sends David into battle, he'll get killed in battle and his hands will be clean. Now David takes a cue from this playbook later on when he deals with Bathsheba. We'll talk about that. But David says, listen, I'm not worthy. I'm a nobody. I'm just a shepherd boy. I'm not worthy of being in the king's family. He's so humble. This is why God chooses him. But Saul tries again. His daughter Michal is in love with David. So he talks with David. He bargains with David. David still doesn't feel worthy. I'm not worthy to be in your family. I'm not worthy to be your son-in-law. So he sends some of his men to try to convince David. And David says, I can't afford the bride price. I'm broke. And Saul says, here's the only thing I require. This is it. Just 100 Philistine foreskins. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Lorena Bobbitt got only one, and that was a big ordeal. It was a huge ordeal. Okay, so 100. Okay, this isn't things you never think you'll hear in church, all right? My preaching professors would be so proud of me. But Saul is thinking, this is an impossible mission. There's no way he survives this. He doesn't just get 100, he gets 200 Philistine foreskins. He doubles down, and it says that Saul becomes even more afraid of David, so David's got to go. So one night at dinner, David is playing the lyre, which is like this small version of a harp, and Saul chucks a spear at his head. And so David now knows I've got father-in-law issues. And so he goes home. And Michal, his wife, and Jonathan, his best friend, who's also Saul's son, are trying to help him out. They're trying to protect him. And a few nights later, David's supposed to have dinner with the king, but he doesn't want to go. I don't know why. No, he doesn't want to go because he's afraid. And he feels all alone. And we get it, right? Like Saul tries to kill him. But here's the thing. God doesn't say, do not be afraid unless the king tries to kill you. God says, do not be afraid, for I will be with you. But what do we know about fear and isolation? It causes us to reject the ways of Jesus because they seem inadequate, they seem irrelevant, they seem so unappealing when we're in conflict. So for the first time, at least that we know of, David doesn't trust God. He doesn't trust that the Lord who saved him from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear and the hand of Goliath will save him from the hand of Saul. So he asks Jonathan to cover for him. He says, listen, just tell him that I needed to go see my family in Bethlehem, and so I couldn't make it to dinner. He asked Jonathan to lie. Now, let me ask you a question. Acceptable or unacceptable? Unacceptable. What would you have done in that situation? You don't have to answer that. We know it's unacceptable, right? Because thou shalt not, lie. And David knows this commandment. He knows all of these commandments, so it's unacceptable. So at dinner, Saul asked where David was. So Jonathan covers for him. This is great. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman." I hope she's not sitting at the table, right? It's awkward. "Don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die." So this did not go the way Jonathan was hoping it would go. And the next day he meets up with David and he gives them the bad news. He tells them how bad the situation is. And David feels abandoned by the king. David feels rejected by the nation that he has fought so hard for the last several years. He's alone and he's afraid. And instead of facing these giants, he turns the other way and he runs. He leaves the palace. And maybe, as we read the story, maybe that would make sense. Maybe that would make sense to us if we didn't know the story. Maybe that would make sense if we didn't know the story of Goliath. Maybe it would make sense if we didn't know about his anointing. Maybe it would make sense if we didn't know that God has been with him, which is why he was so successful. Maybe it would make sense if we didn't know how David's story ends, but we do. And so we know that there's no need to run. We know that there's no reason to be afraid. We know that David's not alone. And the reason we know is because we're not in the story. We're reading the story. We know because we have context for the story. But here's the thing. When you're in the story, it's so easy to forget. When you're in the story, you don't have context. When you're in the story and you feel alone and you feel afraid, the ways of Jesus just seem so counterintuitive. I know I should wait, but running seems like the best option. And so if you were able to enter the story, just think about this for a minute. If you were able to enter David's story, what would you tell him? I mean, wouldn't you tell him, because you read the story, you know the story, wouldn't you tell him that Saul's threats are just that, they're just threats? Wouldn't you tell him that God has a plan? Wouldn't you tell him that God is protecting him? Wouldn't you tell him that God is with him? Wouldn't you tell him that he's not alone? Wouldn't you tell him that there's nothing to be afraid of? David, I know, none of this makes sense. And I know that Saul's got issues, but listen, you're going to be king. See, David doesn't know this yet. He's been anointed, but he doesn't know what he's been anointed for. David, you're going to be king, and not just king, you're going to be the greatest king in Israel's history. In fact, here's the crazy thing, David, 1,000 years from now, God is going to give birth to the Messiah. God is going to reveal the Messiah, Jesus, and he will be called the Son of David. God's got this whole plan of redemption mapped out, and he's using you, so there is no need to run. I mean, isn't that what you would tell David? So why not tell yourself that? Because what's true of David is true of you, except the Messiah part. What's true of David is true of you. You're not alone. And there's nothing to be afraid of. And I know you feel that way, but here's what you need to do. You just need to step out of your story for a minute so that you can stand above it and see what God sees and see what God's doing, because God began a good work in you and he's going to carry it to completion. He is going to finish his work. He did not bring you this far to let you fail. So let's just say this together. I am not alone. And there's nothing to fear. Say it again. I am not alone, and there's nothing to fear. One more time. I am not alone, and there's nothing to fear. Go back to your biggest regret. Would this truth have made a difference? In fact, now that you have some context to that part of the story, were you alone? And was there anything really to be afraid of? Probably not. So the next time these giants of fear and isolation rear their head, you just cut them off. See, if you were able to step into David's story, you may have prevented one of the biggest regrets of his life. Because he felt alone and he felt afraid and he left the palace and he runs to the city of Nob. Now this is where the tabernacle is, and if you've been reading along in our Bible reading plan, you read all about the tabernacle this week, but this is where the presence of God resides. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was, and this is where the priest was. And the priest at that time was a man named Ahimelech. And David goes to see him. And Ahimelech is surprised to see him alone because David usually has an army with him. So he asks him, "Why are you alone?" And David lies. And he says, "I'm on an urgent mission for the king, and my men are going to meet me later at a certain place. But I need food and I need supplies." He says, I had to leave so quickly that I couldn't even get my sword. So here's a warrior who doesn't have a weapon. And so he's asking Ahimelech if he has a weapon. Now David is a stone's throw away from the Ark of the Covenant. Inside the Ark of the Covenant are the 10 Commandments. One of them which says, "Thou shalt not lie." But David has no regard for the mission of God, no regard for the ways of God. The ways of God right now seem really irrelevant and really inadequate. That he's lost sight of the mission of God. All he can focus on now is the mission of survival. And this is where conflict takes us. This is where fear and isolation takes us. Suddenly it's all about me. This is a completely different David than we saw last week. This is a completely different David that walked down into the valley of Elah just a few years earlier to take on a giant. And Ahimelech gives him the consecrated bread from the tabernacle, and he gives him a sword, but not just any sword. The priest replied, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. And if you want it, take it. There is no sword but that one." See, don't miss this moment because David missed this moment. The last time he had held this sword, he was a hero. And it should have caused him to remember. It should have been a reminder to him that God who called him has also equipped him. It should have been a reminder that God's presence that was with him in the valley is with him now. It should have led him to repentance. It should have led him to his knees right then and there to confess before Ahimelech the real reason he was there and the real reason he was alone. It should have given him the courage to turn around and go back to the palace. But the giants of fear and isolation in David's mind were so much bigger than the giant that he faced in the valley. So he missed it, and so do we. We miss it all the time. That's what fear and isolation do to us. They cause us to forget the giants of our past, the defeated giants of our past. They tend to undermine our faith and cause us to forget that God has carried us and God has sustained us all along. And so I want you to remember today how God has been faithful to you. A few minutes ago, I asked you to think about your biggest regret. Now I want you to think about your biggest blessing. The biggest blessing in your life, because they're all from God. And so how has God been faithful to you? Maybe it was with a job opportunity like Jim talked about. Maybe it was walking into this church for the first time like Cindy talked about. Maybe it was joining a small group and finding community. Maybe it was a restored relationship with your husband or your wife or your son or your daughter or your mom or your dad. Maybe it was a bonus that came that you weren't expecting, but you were desperately needing. God graciously gives us the sword of slaying giants all the time, but we usually don't take the time to notice because we feel alone and we feel afraid. And David missed it, and he kept running, and he went to the city of Gath. And this wasn't just the territory of the enemy. Gath was the hometown of Goliath. And the people recognized him. And they looked at him and they said, "Isn't he the one that they sing about? That Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And so they recognize him. And again, that should have been a reminder that God was with him, but he missed it. Here's what it says. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. He's absolutely lost it. And if you pretend to be insane, you're on the verge of being insane. But it worked. And he escaped, and he was on the run again. But meanwhile, reports make it back to Saul that David had been spotted in Nob. That while he was with Ahimelech, one of Saul's servants happened to be there also, Doeg, the Edomite. And he said to Saul that Ahimelech provided food and provided a sword. And so Saul sent for Ahimelech and his family. He accused Ahimelech of conspiring against him and helping David escape. And Ahimelech is clueless. He thought he was helping the king by helping David because David lied to him. He didn't know the real reason David was there. And here's what it says. Ahimelech answered the king, "Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of the bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair." But the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family." And Ahimelech was executed. And 85 more priests were executed. And every man and every woman and every child in the city of Nob were executed. One escaped. One of Ahimelech's sons. And he found David. And he told David all that Saul had done. And David says this, "I am responsible for the death of your whole family." You feel the weight of that statement? That's what fear and isolation does. It wreaks havoc, not just on you, but on the people around you. And David is filled with regret. Fear and isolation caused him to reject the ways of God, and an entire village paid the price, and as much as he wants to. He can't undo what's been done. Now, it's not likely that your giants of fear and isolation caused the decimation of an entire town. But let me ask you this question. What did die as a result? What did fear and isolation put an end to for you? What died because you were alone and you were afraid? Was it a relationship? Maybe a relationship with a spouse. Maybe it was a relationship with a child. Relationship with a parent, sibling. Was it your integrity? Like David, you lied to protect yourself? Was it a dream that died? Was it an opportunity that died? So you can't undo what's been done, but you don't have to redo what you can't undo. So let me just ask you another question. What is God calling you to right now that will die if you don't stand up and face those giants? God's mission is to glorify His name, establish His kingdom, and reconcile the world to Himself. And whatever He's calling you to is about making those three things a reality. So don't repeat another regret. Don't repeat another regret. It's a chapter in your story. It doesn't have to be the theme of your story because you're not alone and there's nothing to fear. You know this. So don't run. Don't lie. Just wait and trust that God will rescue you from the hand of fear and that He will rescue you from the hand of isolation. That's what you would tell someone else if you were to step into their story. So when it's your story, tell yourself, I'm not alone. And there's nothing to fear. You know this because you've been there before. And it caused regrets that you can't undo, but you don't have to redo. And years later, David would write it down in his journal so that he would never forget. And it's been preserved for us so that it can be a reminder for us as well. In Psalm 25, he says, "To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. Oh my God, in you I trust. Let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies exult over me. Indeed, none who wait for you shall be put to shame. Make me to know your ways, not mine. Oh Lord, teach me your paths, not mine. Lead me in your truth, not mine. And teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, He instructs sinners in the way. His ways are so much better. He leads the humble in what is right, and He teaches the humble His way. Now, all the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep His covenant and His testimonies. For those of us who do things the Jesus way, He says, turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. I am lonely and afraid. Oh, guard my soul and deliver me. Let me not be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. My integrity and my uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. See, when you're alone and afraid, that's really hard to do. When you're alone and afraid, the last thing you want to do is wait. When you're alone and afraid, the ways of Jesus seem really inadequate and really insufficient and really counterintuitive. But we have to learn this lesson from David, that taking matters into our own hands rarely ever works out. But when we're willing to wait on the Lord, He reminds us of our victories in the valleys. We're going to take communion, which is, we do this every week, and that's what communion is. It's a reminder of a victory in the valley. It's a reminder that Jesus came to us so that we would not be alone, that He died in our place and then rose from the dead, so there would be nothing for us to fear. So whatever giant you're facing today, remember this: the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. So let's just be still. As we take communion, let's be still and let's wait on the Lord. Let's be still and let's hear the voice of our Father speak over us, speak truth over us, speak His ways over us, speak integrity over us. Father, would you whisper to our heart right now in a way that we can hear you so clearly? The truth that only comes from you. That we are not alone. For you are with us. And there is nothing to fear. God, give us courage to wait on you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.